Now, this is a story that is reeking of controversy, and there's so many conspiracy theories and everything like that. Maui has had these fires that have ripped through and burn up a bunch of places over there, and some people say it was set by environmentalists. Some people say it was it's Oprah that's trying to make the property cheaper because all of the other people's houses burnt down, but all the rich people, all the other famous actors that have property there, none of their houses burnt down. But all this conspiracy theory. But one of the big ones, fingers that people are pointing, and they're blaming the power lines. And so Hawaiian Electric, I think is their the utility company's name. Apparently, they had a report many years ago, or for a long time, saying that their power lines need maintenance and they're causing little fires because they're creating sparks and things like that. So the finger is pointing to them. Now, they have not been responsible, and they said, look, we're making this shift to green energy, so we're not going to do any more maintenance on our old technology. And then now all this fire has been fires caused. Dr. Rod, if this is actually caused by Hawaiian Electric, by their lack of maintenance, are they responsible for the fires?
Well, we do know for sure and certain that electrical wires do cause fires. They cause fires in many places. Now, why does a fire start? Because it's got something to burn. All right.
Yeah.
So we've got a power company with power lines. There've been some sort of malfunction, sparks, and there's something to burn underneath the wires. It's not always the electric company that has allowed the grass and the scrub to grow. Mm-hmm. And what we're finding now is that many authorities on environmental grounds, they are not doing what we call in Australia controlled burn-offs to get rid of that combustible material that accumulates and becomes tinder dry when you have long periods without rain, and a small spark, especially with a little bit of wind, can cause a massive fire. There are other issues there that, of course, compounded the problem. My understanding is that the warning sirens that were installed primarily to warn against tsunamis and so on, and hurricanes and whatnot, they weren't activated, so local people didn't really receive any warnings. There was another issue with water, that the diversion of water to the firefighters was delayed because there were consultation with farmers downstream. By the time those consultations were finished, it was too late to actually access the water. There was a whole range of other malfunctions in the bureaucracy that led to this becoming a much larger disaster than it otherwise would have been. I understand also that the automated systems for warning people through text messages on their phones and so on, they also didn't work for some reason. So it's not as simple as saying the electric company caused this fire to start, because there's a whole lot of other influences and negligences that came into play that led to this disaster, which is the worst fire disaster in the United States for over 100 years. A considerable loss of life. But everybody's, again, they say, well, we're not really responsible. It wasn't really our fault. There was a confluence of failures by businesses and public authorities. And nobody wants to accept any responsibility for it. It's an absolute disgrace.
And so what do we do as leaders in this situation that there's a comedy of errors?
A comedy of errors.
A comedy of errors. When there's a comedy of errors that all happen And you need to take your responsibility, but like you've just said, you need to be very analytical and go, okay, there's all these things to play. How do we take a collective responsibility, or how do we make, because I mean, yes, the power company can't just go, well, it was all us. No, it's like, well, it was us, but with all these other things, how do you best lead the collective responsibility?
Well, you've got to find out who's supposed to lead that collective responsibility in the first place. And for something like that, it would have to be public authorities like the local mayor. I have heard the local mayor interviewed, wasn't particularly impressed by that at all. You might argue, well, okay, if we didn't have overhead power lines, then this wouldn't have happened in the first place. Who's willing to pay the price for the electricity to have underground power lines? They're far, far more expensive than overhead power lines. So one of the reasons why we have overhead power lines is that it's a lot cheaper than the alternatives, which are a lot safer. So as a whole community, we've made a particular choice based on the cost of electricity. So that's one thing we can address. What do we want to do as a society? Do we want to place human safety above the number of dollars we have to spend to get electricity to our homes? I think another big issue is, how do we manage environmental interests? And sadly, in many countries of the world, we've given up on seasonal strategic burning off of combustible material.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, it was routine. Everybody knew you needed to get those burn-offs in the wintertime to get rid of the dry combustible material so you wouldn't have a big fire.
It was a standard thing.
It was a standard practice.
Smokes were coming through, they're constantly doing it. Yeah.
And look, as a kid brought up in the bush, I think it's morally wrong and also environmentally wrong not to do those burn-offs. Because when you have a catastrophic fire, it just causes so much damage. And can you imagine the damage to wildlife that a big wildfire like that causes? We've seen the same here in Australia as well. Another issue too is that everybody wants to live in a place like that. And so you wind up with huge population pressure as well. And we have to ask the question as a community, is there a limit either to the density of housing or to the overall number of people who should live in a particular area? So, yeah, there are a lot of community issues here, and it requires pretty deft leadership. And look, I'd have to admit, I'm pretty sceptical about politics nowadays. I think there are far too many people in politics at every level, from local government right up to federal government, who are career politicians who actually see it as a career, not as a service to the community.
Yeah.
And I think there are also far too many who are driven purely ideologically, and they're not at all pragmatic. We need a degree of pragmatism also in community leadership.
So there definitely needs to be, when there's a situation like this, we need a leader to stand up. But that's what you're saying. Like, who is the leader? Well, it's really the political leader, or here's the thing. It may be your local church. It may be your local sports, team, or it may be your youth group, or it may be your business or whatever. There is always an opportunity there when there's a crisis and something has happened. There is an opportunity for a leader to stand up. Maybe not necessarily to take the blame for the situation, but a leader needs to step up and see how you can gather people together to take the collective responsibility. If there was a situation that there was many contributing factors, then we need to be responsible and see how can we lead that situation, to gather in those leaders, to have the right conversations, to have roundtables, to negotiate, to try to figure, rather than everyone pointing blame, but like looking at everyone, like how can we all take a collective responsibility in this situation, and hopefully that would help move forward a situation. Well,
can I just make one other comment, Craig?
Yes,
this is in relation to consultations with farmers downstream.
Yes.
I think when we're leaders, we have to understand that we have to change our style of leadership in a disaster.
Yes.
Be that a corporate disaster or a natural disaster. You've got to become entirely transactional in a disaster. There's no time to sit around a table and consult with anybody. I understand the guy who made the decision to go and talk to the farmers has been moved sideways.
Sideways.
He's been moved sideways. But look, the word I would apply to the decision to consult, that's just plain stupid.
Yeah.
Right, in the face of disaster where human lives are at risk, you have to act right away. And then if there are any consequences to follow, well, you're going to have to deal with that later. But listen, when there's a disaster, if it's a corporate disaster like a total collapse in your customer base, or a fire in your warehouse, or a great public relations disaster, you can't sort of be the kind of leader who sits down and talks to people around it. I mean, you're never going to rescue somebody in a flood by having a meeting.
Yes.
You rescue people in a flood by actually getting out there and doing a swift water rescue.
That's really good.
And in a fire, you get water to the firefighters. You know, and generally speaking, in law, a good Samaritan principle will apply here, even if you've done something wrong. That because what you were motivated by was to save lives, you would generally not find yourself on the wrong side of the law in any case. So that decision to consult, I mean, that honestly, that's an absolutely disgraceful way to lead. You got to get in there and make some decisions straight away, and the right decision to make was to release water to the fire people straight away.
Yeah, and I think that to add to that, because you're right, you're like, in a crisis, we do need to lead kind of differently. However, because I remember I was challenged, I was coaching a corporate group, like a board, and there was one person on the board that just wasn't open to me coaching this group. She looked down on me. She was new to the group. She come in with a bit of bravado. She thought, she knew everything, and I'm going through our leadership model, about we need to align all of our purposes and everything like that, and that's how we need to do it. If you want to know more about that, free leadership development program, link in description. Go and check that out. Free, shameless plug. But if she came up to me or kind of challenged me when I finished kind of presenting this concept, and she's like, "Oh yeah, but you can't lead that." In an ER when you're dealing with an emergency, you can't lead like that. I'm like, well, actually, the leadership that happens in a crisis, yes, like you said, Dr. Rod, it does need to change. However, how you lead in a crisis has been positioned by how you have led leading up to that crisis. Because if leading up to that crisis, you have included everyone, everyone's feel valued, they feel like their purpose is aligned with your purpose, everything like that. In an emergency or something where you bark an order, they know that you care about them. They know that you still want their best interests and stuff like that, and you've built up a relationship with them, built up a reputation with them. You built up a rapport with them, so that when you do bark that order, they're like, you know what? In this moment, in this emergency, I'm just going to follow this person because I know that they've got my best interests at heart. So I feel like it's not necessarily how you lead in. What happens in an emergency is actually impacted by how you've led leading up to that, so that then in an emergency you can snap your fingers and you have the respect of people. They will be willing to follow you and put their head down and maybe believe that you have everyone's best interest at heart, because that's what you've proven over time. Hey, you just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership Podcast. If you like that, hit the like button and put a comment below. Hey, if you want to watch more videos like this, check out our channel, and while you're there, make sure you subscribe.